Hey everyone, Julian here, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make music like floating points. This one has been requested a bunch, and as usual, you can get the project file and samples from this video in the description, and if you're a patron on my Patreon, make sure to check there because they'll be available. And yeah, let's dive in. So the first thing I have here is this ARP, which sounds like this. So the way that I made this, I'll show you the MIDI first. Essentially, I have this like long kind of thing. The way that I did this was basically I took this like sort of shorter pattern. I took this, which is just this little ARP in A minor. This track is in A minor, so yeah, it's just in the key. And what I did was, you can see it's sort of like an irregular pattern because this whole thing is happening on like, 1 bar patterns. Like it's 8 bars long, but once it gets to the end of 1 bar, everything is supposed to restart, in theory. However, this sound, you can see, basically plays for just under a half note. A half note being this between 1 and 1.3 here. And then what it does is it just keeps restarting. So you can see this root, the first note essentially, is never in the same place. And so this gives it like this irregular feel. And thus, when you hear it, it kind of sounds like, it sounds like it's constantly restarting. And it sounds like it's something new each time. Because again, you're thinking in 1 bar patterns, but this thing is playing in this like weird, irregular, almost half note thing. So then for the synth sound on this, I made it with analog. What we have is 2 saw waves, and you can see on one of them I have this little pitch envelope, so this just gives it a bit of kind of like obscureness. You can hear when I turn it off, like it's one of those things you don't really know what it is, but it just adds a little bit of extra, like I said, like obscureness and just interestingness to the sound, so to speak. I also have the sync on here with the ratio of 41. It just makes it sound a little bit more kind of like metallic. So yeah, so then after that I have those going into a low pass filter with a bit of an envelope. I have the amp envelope set like that. And then I have a bit of echo. One thing to note is I don't have these ears, the left and right ear linked. So this just gives it more of a stereo effect because they're doing 2 different things. So you're hearing 2 different things in each ear. And yeah, it just kind of gives it more stereo width. Then I have a bit of reverb on that, and then I have a compressor side chaining it to the kick, and then finally, I just have an EQ8 cutting out the low end, and I boosted a bit of highs as well. The thing is, this is a pretty dense track, like musically, so I wanted to give each layer its space, so yeah, definitely cutting out the low end there was pretty important. So the next thing I have here is this sort of like rhythmic drone. It sounds like this. So the reason why I call this a rhythmic drone is because a drone is something that just plays throughout the track and plays the same thing and while everything else is changing. And that's what this does. However, it's more rhythmic. You can see it's like these sort of stab chords. I have A minor, and then this last one, I just took the A here. I moved it up to E. And yeah, it's just playing like that. So this does kind of like what a drone would do, but it's more rhythmic, and it also plays off of the ARP a little bit. These are kind of like rhythmic melodic elements, I like to think of them as. So then for the sound here, basically I made this in analog as well. We have 1 saw wave going into a low pass filter with a bit of an envelope on it. You can hear that. And then the amp envelope is just set very similar to that. And then I just have that going into a bit of chorus for some space, and it makes it a little bit more watery and kind of like stereo sounding. And then I have a bit of echo on that for some more space, and a bit of reverb for even more space. You can see I played with the size on that. And then finally I just have a compressor side tuning into the kick, and then an EQ8 cutting out the low end, just like with the ARP. So this layer, again, it just kind of works like a drone, but it's more rhythmic, so it kind of adds to the groove. So then the next thing I have here is this long drone, which sounds like this. So this is like an actual drone. What we have is, it's just this simple synth that's playing an A minor chord. You see A minor, and then I move that C up an octave to kind of spread it out and give it more depth. And then for the synth sound here, what we have is I just have a square wave. I wanted to use a square because I used saws for the last 2 sounds. And then I have that going into a bandpass filter, so it's just kind of shaping the sound, because if you turn it off, that's taking up a lot of the frequency spectrum. But luckily, a bandpass filter can be used to just hone in on a specific range. And this is something I've heard Floating Points do, because he uses a lot of these drones in his tracks. And yeah, it's just a really good way to keep it under control and also make it a little bit more interesting. Like, it sounds kind of a little bit different when you filter it. So then after that, I just have a bit of vibrato to give it some kind of like warble. And yeah, so then for effects here, it's pretty simple. I just have an echo, just giving it some kind of like space, and it obscures it a little bit too. It makes it sound like it's not just coming straight out of the synth. And then I just have a compressor side chaining it to the kick. So that is the drone. And then the next thing we have here is this bass, which sounds like this. So this is the bass of the track. It's just following the chord progression. You can hear it's a bit rhythmic too, like if I play it with the drums. The notes don't just start on the one, they kind of play on that 16th note there, so it kind of like grabs your ear, I feel like. And this is something Floating Points does a lot. Like, he has a lot of tracks where he has chord progressions like this that are pretty simple, but then the rhythm is what makes it really interesting. So then also, then I just have that extra little note there. This is playing off of the Rhodes. You can see in the Rhodes, which I'm going to explain in a moment, that's only playing those like these notes, the chords. So while that has a little blank moment there where it's not playing anything, I have this one doing that little extra note. So then for the sound on this bass, basically I made it with analog as well. I really like using analog for this style because like Floating Points uses a lot of analog synths. He uses a lot of old vintage gear. It's a big sort of cornerstone of his sound. And yeah, so analog is a really good way to recreate that because it's just got that kind of like that vibe to it. So this is just two saw waves going into a low pass filter, which has an envelope like this. It's a pluck, but then it still allows the note to kind of play out. It just kind of hits at the start there, and yeah, then the note just plays for the rest of the time. And then on the amp envelope just set like that, so it's just kind of like a long brick, so to speak. And then finally, I just have a bit of vibrato on there because you can hear like with these longer bass notes, it gives it some nice movement. Without this, I feel like it would just be a little bit boring. It would just be kind of like, yeah, just held out bass notes. But this gives it some movement and some like organic quality. So then after that, I have a bit of reverb. This is just to give the sound a bit of space. Like the thing is that Floating Points is also really good. Not only just at like giving his sounds realness in the sense of like having like the analog kind of warm sound, but he's also very good at giving his sounds like that sort of space and that feel like they're all sort of in the same room. So putting a little bit of reverb on your bass, again, not like a long reverb, but a really tight one like this, is a really good way to do that. You can hear when I turn it off, it just sounds really dry, but when I add it, yeah, it's just adding that extra little bit of kind of sparkle, I guess, or polish. So then after that, I just have a bit of saturation to beef it up, make it a bit more warm and, yeah, analog sounding. And then finally, I just have a compressor side chaining into the kick. So that's the bass. And then the next thing we have here is the Rhodes, which sounds like this. So this is just following the chord progression. I just have it playing an A minor chord, and then I have this F major 7, so yeah, the A minor, pretty simple, it's just an A and then A minor up there. And then F major 7, it's just a regular F major 7 chord, F, A, C, E, and then I put the A up an octave. So it'll be kind of more spread out, and it gives it that kind of nicer, like, jazzy sound that Floating Points has a lot. So then the way that I made this sound was just with this Ableton electronic piano or Rhodes or whatever you want to call it. It's this EP faceplant. I turned the brightness up a bunch because usually when Floating Points uses Rhodes like this, it tends to be more of that like kind of jazzy, like bright, more powerful Rhodes. He doesn't usually use them for like more ambient kind of sounds, so I just wanted to try and get that kind of sound. And then on that, I have a bit of chorus, just giving it a bit of kind of stereo width, and it makes it more like watery and sampled sounding. And yeah, then I just have a bit of reverb. You can see I have a pretty short decay time. It's just giving it space, similar to the one I used on the bass. And then finally, I just have a compressor side chaining to the kick, and an EQ8 cutting out the low end. So the next thing here are the drums, which sound like this. So we have a small amount of processing on the group. I'll show you the individual sounds first. First thing here is the kick, which sounds like this. So just kind of like a punchy, nice sort of like drum machine style kick. Yeah, with this one, I don't have any processing on just the individual sound, but it's more just about like the type of kick you choose. Again, like a sort of more punchy, like smooth, but still powerful drum machine kick like this is really the way to go for this sound. So the next thing we have here is this little drum rack, which has a bunch of percussion in it. It sounds like this. So basically, the way I see this is it's kind of like two different things going on. We have this tambourine pattern, And then we have like these hi-hats. And there's also like the little snare fills. Those just give it some kind of like, yeah, just give it, I guess, essentially like punctuation at the end of every couple bars, so to speak. But yeah, so this is kind of similar to what I was doing up here, actually, with this ARP and this like rhythmic drone being kind of like the rhythmic melodic section. Like, they play off of each other, but they don't get in the way of each other. So this is kind of like, I mean, I guess this really is more like an overall thing with layering, but it's like a similar theory here with these tambourines and hi-hats. Like, they're playing off of each other, and they're not getting in the way, but they're playing at the same time. So, yeah, this is something I hear Floating Point's doing a lot. Like, usually he'll have, like, sort of a hi-hat thing going, like I have here, and then, yeah, just add, like, some kind of tambourine or shaker or something like that over it to give it that extra little depth. And then the little fills as well, I hear him doing those quite a bit. So, yeah, so this one's more, like, you know, just about finding, like, those cool hi-hats and then putting the little tambourine or shaker or something like that over it to just give it another layer and give it some more, yeah, just more going on, I suppose. So the next drum that I have here is this clap, which sounds like this. And this is just a really simple, kind of like punchy clap. This is usually the kind that Floating Points uses, like just a really, like I said, short and tight one like this. The only thing I will say with this is you can see I moved it slightly off the grid. This would be like perfectly on the grid. However, if I play that with the clap, you can hear, or with the kick, it's a little weird sounding. So, like, it just kind of gets buried under the kick. So, I moved it a little bit back, and it gives it just this really, really cool sound. And this is something I hear in a lot of Floating Points music as well. Like, I know he definitely uses this technique for sure. So, yeah, I recommend doing that. Like, when you have these really short claps that kind of just sound like a part of your kick almost when they hit with it, try moving them just slightly back because it'll give you, like, a kind of cool feel. So then on the group here, I just have a bit of saturation. Yeah, like I was saying earlier, Floating Points uses a lot of like analog gear and usually puts his drums through like different old mixing consoles and tape recording and all that kind of stuff. So adding some saturation to your drums is kind of a good way to recreate that in the box, so to speak. So I just have a bit of drive, and then I have the analog clip here, and I turn up the bass frequency. You can hear when I turn it on, it just adds a little bit of crunch to everything and kind of like helps glue it all together and beefs it up. So then the last thing I have here is a bit of tape noise. I have 2 layers. Here's what it sounds like all together. And so it's a bit quiet. I will turn those up, but yeah, so basically I just have this first one, which is more of like a high-end kind of one. It sounds like this. So yeah, that one is just like entirely in the high end. It's very quiet, but you know, it's just kind of in there, giving a bit of like brightness. The thing is, like I was saying earlier, Floating Points uses a lot of analog gear and like records stuff through tapes and puts stuff through different mixing consoles. So a lot of this tape noise here would just kind of be created by that. Like you would usually have some kind of like high-end sizzly thing like this. So adding these just kind of does that. And yes, this is the first layer of that. It's just more of the high end. I have it EQ'd and then I have it sidechained to the kick. And then the second one here, you can see on the EQ and you can hear it as well, is a little bit more in the low end. Or like the mid-range. So this is important because like I was saying, you know, when you would get this kind of tape noise from like an actual tape or from a desk or something like that, it wouldn't just be the high-end one and it wouldn't just be the mid-range one. It would be kind of unpredictable, to be honest, but usually, you know, it's not just going to be perfectly one way or another. It's going to be a lot of different kind of random things. So I have 2 layers here to just kind of get a more in-depth sound and, yeah, just kind of nail that down a little bit more accurately. So, yes, that's pretty much it there. You know, I mostly just want to show you guys, like, how to do the kind of more analog sounding stuff in the box. And yeah, so that is going to be it for today, guys. Make sure to let me know what you think of this video in the comments, and make sure to like this video as well as subscribe. I hope you enjoyed. You can check out my social media on the screen. You can also get the project file and samples for this video in the description, either on my Bandcamp or on my Patreon. And yeah, thank you again, everybody, and I will see you tomorrow with another tutorial.